The envelope wasn't hidden. That was the thing that stayed with me longest, not the contents, not what they meant, not the way my hands started shaking before I'd even broken the seal. It was the fact that she hadn't hidden it. It was sitting in the second drawer of her desk, beneath a stack of utility bills and an old birthday card from her mother, tucked there with the casual indifference of something she'd meant to deal with later. Like a dentist appointment. Like a form that needed filling out. My name is Ethan. I was 36 years old when I found it, and I had been in love with Emily for 12 years. I wasn't snooping. I want to be clear about that, not because it matters legally or morally, but because for months afterward I would return to that detail like a man pressing a bruise, needing to establish that I had not gone looking for this. I had been cleaning the home office on a Saturday morning while Emily took Noah to his soccer practice. Noah was 7. He had his mother's dark eyes and a laugh that could fill a room, and I had been coaching his Saturday practices for 2 seasons because his regular coach had a scheduling conflict, and I'd volunteered without thinking twice, the way you do when you're a father and your kid needs something. Emily had said she'd take him that morning. I'd been grateful. I had a project quote to finish, a bathroom renovation for a couple on Elmwood Drive, and I'd kissed them both goodbye at the door and gone back to my desk and worked for an hour before I ran out of printer paper. Her desk was tidier than mine. I'd opened the second drawer looking for the spare ream she kept there. The envelope was white, standard letter size, with a return address from a genetic testing company I recognized. LabCorp subsidiary. I had processed enough insurance paperwork in my previous corporate life to know what that logo meant. The flap had been opened and resealed, not carefully, the way you'd reseal something you wanted to preserve, but quickly, with the particular crookedness of a flap pressed back down in a hurry. I stood at her desk for what felt like a long time. The printer sat on the shelf above me. The spare paper was right there. I could have taken it and left. I didn't ask myself why I opened the envelope. I think I already knew, in the way that you sometimes know things before you know them, the knowledge sitting just below the surface of your conscious mind like a stone at the bottom of clear water, visible but not yet reached. I unfolded the single page inside. I read it once. Then I sat down on the floor, not deliberately, not dramatically, just because my legs stopped working, and I read it again. Noah James? Probability of paternity, 0%. The soccer field was 12 minutes away. They would be back in less than 2 hours. I put the paper back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the drawer, beneath the utility bills and the birthday card from her mother, in roughly the position I had found it. I went back to my desk. I sat in front of my project quote for 45 minutes and did not type a single word. When I heard Emily's car in the driveway and Noah's voice carrying through the front door, "Dad, we won the scrimmage, it was 3-1, I scored the second goal," I stood up and walked to the hallway and I looked at my son running toward me with mud on his shin guards and something in my chest cracked open so quietly that I almost didn't hear it. "That's incredible, Bud," I said. My voice came out right. Even. Warm. I had no idea yet what I was going to do. But something had already ended, and I think some part of me understood that the ending had happened a long time before I opened that drawer. Let me tell you who we were before I knew. Emily and I met in the fall of our junior year of college. She was studying communications. I was finishing an economics degree I was already losing interest in. We met at a party, talked until 2 in the morning on a back porch about everything except what we'd studied, and I drove her home in my roommate's borrowed car with the broken heater, and she wore my jacket the whole way and I never asked for it back. We were college sweethearts in the truest and most uncomplicated sense of it. We were together for 3 years before I proposed, married a year after that, and I remember standing at the altar looking at her coming down the aisle and thinking that this was the part of life where you'd done the right thing. Where the good choice and the wanted choice were the same choice. That feeling doesn't come around often. I thought I was one of the lucky ones. I had been in corporate finance, mid-level management at a regional insurance firm, the kind of job that looks stable from the outside and feels like slow erosion from the inside. I was good at it without being built for it. I left when Noah was 2, after a restructuring gave me a severance, and a clear-eyed moment of reckoning. I retrained, picked up contracting licenses, and built a handyman and renovation business that paid roughly the same and felt like I was actually making something. Emily worked in communications for a regional healthcare network. She was good at her job, organized, persuasive, the person in any meeting who could read the room and shift the pitch without anyone noticing the shift had happened. I had always admired that about her. It was a skill I didn't have. I tended to say what I meant. We were, by any external measure, a functional family. We had a house with a yard Noah could play in. We had dinners together most nights. We had a routine that held. But looking back now, and I do this with the specific discomfort of a man reconstructing a past he thought he already knew, there were things I filed away without examining. Small things. The kind that only look like a pattern once you know what you're looking for. Emily had started going to the gym in the evenings about 8 months before I found the envelope. This had not seemed strange to me. She'd mentioned wanting to get back into a routine. I had encouraged it. She'd go 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, back by 9:30, and I'd be putting Noah to bed or watching something and I'd hear the door and feel the ordinary relief of a household restored to its normal number. Her phone had changed. Not dramatically, she'd always been someone who kept it close, but there was a new quality to the closeness. She'd flip it face down when she set it on the counter. She'd take it to the bathroom when she showered. I had noticed this and told myself it was nothing, and I had believed myself because believing required less energy than the alternative. There was one evening that I keep returning to. About 6 months before the envelope. We'd had dinner, Noah was in bed, we were sitting on the back porch with wine, and Emily had gotten a text, and the way she glanced at her phone and then set it down, the micro-adjustment in her posture, the brief and controlled neutrality that crossed her face, I had seen it. I had clocked it with the part of the brain that notices things before the conscious mind decides what to do with them. I hadn't asked? Not because I was afraid. I told myself I wasn't afraid. I told myself I trusted her and that checking a phone text was not a crime and that I was not the kind of man who demanded accounting of every notification. These were all true things. What I was using them for was a different matter. I was using them to not ask a question whose answer I wasn't ready for. That's not the same as trust. I understand that now. Real trust doesn't need to avoid the question. What I had was a studied and deliberate form of not looking, which is the emotional equivalent of covering a crack in the wall with a picture frame and then complimenting yourself on the decor. Noah, during this period, was entirely himself, loud and curious and physically incapable of entering a room quietly. He had a habit of climbing into our bed on weekend mornings and narrating everything that had occurred to him since he woke up, and this had been one of the reliable joys of my days. He called me Dad with the complete absence of reflection that children bring to the names of things they've never had reason to question. Looking back, I can trace the shape of what I missed. The gym that wasn't always the gym. The phone face down. The text on the back porch. None of them were conclusive. None of them were nothing. I chose to hold them in the second category, and I chose that with full awareness of what I was choosing, even if I didn't admit it to myself until much later. The envelope was not a surprise. That's the part that took me longest to understand. It was a confirmation. And somewhere in my chest, in the place where I'd been filing things away without examining them, I had known for months that a confirmation was coming. After I found the envelope, I put it back. I said nothing. I want to explain what that was, because it wasn't shock, exactly, and it wasn't strategic silence. It was something more like a system reboot. The mind encountering information so structurally incompatible with its existing model of the world that it simply suspends normal operations while it processes. I went through the next 3 days on autopilot. I made breakfast. I drove Noah to school. I showed up to a bathroom renovation on Elmwood Drive and measured tile, and said the right things to the homeowner about grout color. I came home and sat at the dinner table and watched Emily pour wine and talk about a difficult colleague, and I nodded and I responded, and some part of me was watching myself do this from a distance of about 10 feet, mildly impressed that the performance was holding. Emily didn't notice. That was one of the first things I catalogued. She didn't notice that anything was different in me. She laughed at something Noah said about his teacher. She asked me about the Elmwood project. She went to bed at 10:30 and was asleep within minutes, with the physical ease of a person who does not have a secret sitting directly below the surface of their daily life. Or maybe she did and I just couldn't see it. I called Josh on a Wednesday evening from my truck, parked outside a hardware store on the other side of town. Josh had been my closest friend since we were 11 years old. We'd grown up 3 streets apart, gone to different colleges, drifted in and out of regular contact the way old friends do, but there had never been a conversation with Josh that required context, because he had been there for all of it. I told him what I'd found. All of it. I didn't edit. There was a long silence on the other end. The kind that means the person is deciding how honest to be. "Ethan," he said finally, "I need to tell you something." He had seen Emily. About 14 months ago. At a restaurant across town. With a man. It had been a Thursday evening. Josh had been meeting a client nearby, and he'd seen them from across the room. He hadn't said anything because he hadn't been certain of what he was seeing. He told himself it could have been a work dinner. He talked himself out of it with the same logic I'd been using on myself for months. "I should have told you," he said. "I know I should have." "Did you recognize him?" I asked. "No," Josh said. "But I remember what he looked like." I sat with that for a moment. A specific man. A face Josh could describe. Something that could be found or named or confirmed. I didn't ask Josh to do anything with that information. I thanked him and said goodnight and sat in the truck for a while longer. The hardware store's parking lot lights were buzzing at a frequency that felt personal. Here is what I knew: Noah was not my biological son. Emily had known this. She'd ordered and received the results herself, which meant she had questioned it at some point, had enough doubt to test it, and had received confirmation and said nothing to me. The test was dated 14 months prior. The same approximate period when Josh had seen her at that restaurant. The man at the restaurant was almost certainly Andrew. I didn't know his last name yet. I knew his first name because I had gone through Emily's phone one time, late at night 3 days after I found the envelope, while she was asleep, and seen a contact labeled only A in a thread that had gone quiet about 13 months ago, around the time the restaurant dinner would have been. The last message in that thread, from Emily, was 4 words: "This has to stop." 4 words. 13 months of silence after them. A DNA test 2 months later. I had put her phone back exactly where I found it. I had not let myself read further back in the thread, partly because I was not sure I could hold what I'd find there, and partly because I had already found the only thing I needed. She had known. She had ended it, apparently. And then she had ordered a DNA test. And then she had received the results. And then she had put them in the second drawer of her desk beneath the utility bills and carried on as if my life were what I thought it was. The question I kept arriving at was not whether she had cheated, that was settled, but whether she had intended to tell me. Whether the test was ordered because she was preparing to confess, or because she needed to know the answer before deciding whether to confess at all. I didn't know which of those was worse. I still don't. What I was discovering, in those slow days, was that the affair itself was not the thing that was destroying me. The affair was a wound. Painful, real, something I could put a name to. What was destroying me was the calculus. The evidence that Emily had sat with the truth for over a year and assessed it, and filed it in a drawer and decided that my knowing was not a priority. Noah came home from school on a Friday with a drawing he'd made of our family. Crayon. Slightly oversized heads, the way kids draw. Me on the left with a hammer because he knew I was doing a renovation, Emily in the middle, Noah on the right holding what appeared to be a soccer ball. He handed it to me with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone presenting a piece of work he's proud of. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket and did not take it out for a week. That was the first time I truly understood what this was going to cost. Not me. Noah. A kid who drew his family with crayon on a Friday afternoon and saw it exactly as it appeared, because nobody had given him any reason to see it differently. I am not someone who does things without thinking them through. It's a quality that served me well in corporate finance and serves me differently in a renovation business. There you think things through with your hands as well as your head, but the fundamental orientation is the same. I needed to understand the shape of what had happened before I decided what to do with it. I called Marcus, not a private investigator, but a forensic accountant I'd worked with briefly during the insurance years, a man I respected for his precision and his discretion. I didn't need financial investigation. What I needed was the name. Marcus had contacts. The kind built over 20 years of following paper trails in places people didn't want followed. I gave him what I had, the description Josh provided, the approximate 14-month timeline, the restaurant location, the initial A in the phone contact. I told him what I needed, a full name, and any connection to Emily's professional network. It took him 11 days. Andrew Callahan, 41 years old. A project manager at a regional construction firm whose offices were 3 blocks from Emily's healthcare network building. They had overlapped on a joint infrastructure project. Her organization had been coordinating communications for a new clinic build. His firm had been the contractor. The project had run for roughly 18 months, beginning approximately 3.5 years ago. 8 years ago, Emily and I had been trying for a baby. We'd had 2 years of effort, 1 miscarriage, and a period of quiet desperation that had tested everything between us in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged at the time. When Emily got pregnant with Noah, I had felt something close to religious relief. I had not looked too closely at the timing. I had not wanted to. Looking back now, and this is the one I return to most, the one that sits in the chest differently from the others, I had known, in some pre-verbal and unexamined way, that the timelines were close. Emily had been working late. There had been a period of particular distance between us. And then the pregnancy. And the joy of it had been so clean and total that I had let it erase everything that came before. I had made a decision, years ago, without ever admitting I was making it. I had chosen to believe. Not because the evidence supported it, but because the alternative was a door I didn't want to open. Denial isn't weakness. I understood that now. It's a choice, a deliberate, costly, fully conscious choice disguised as an absence of awareness. You don't sleepwalk into it. You walk in with your eyes open and pull the door shut behind you. I sat with everything Marcus had given me for 4 days. I sat with it through 3 dinners and a Sunday morning and 2 of Noah's soccer practices. I sat with it while Emily talked to me normally and made coffee and asked about my schedule and moved through our shared life with the smooth and unremarkable ease of a woman who had processed her own reckoning a year ago and come out the other side into a resolved, compartmentalized version of the truth. She had decided I didn't need to know. Noah came home from school on a Friday with a drawing he'd made of our family. Crayon. Slightly oversized heads, the way kids draw. Me on the left with a hammer because he knew I was doing a renovation, Emily in the middle, Noah on the right holding what appeared to be a soccer ball. He handed it to me with the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone presenting a piece of work he's proud of. I folded it carefully and put it in my jacket pocket and did not take it out for a week. That was the first time I truly understood what this was going to cost. Not me. Noah. A kid who drew his family with crayon on a Friday afternoon and saw it exactly as it appeared, because nobody had given him any reason to see it differently. I am not someone who does things without thinking them through. It's a quality that served me well in corporate finance and serves me differently in a renovation business. There you think things through with your hands as well as your head, but the fundamental orientation is the same. I needed to understand the shape of what had happened before I decided what to do with it. I called Marcus, not a private investigator, but a forensic accountant I'd worked with briefly during the insurance years, a man I respected for his precision and his discretion. I didn't need financial investigation. What I needed was the name. Marcus had contacts. The kind built over 20 years of following paper trails in places people didn't want followed. I gave him what I had, the description Josh provided, the approximate 14-month timeline, the restaurant location, the initial A in the phone contact. I told him what I needed, a full name, and any connection to Emily's professional network. It took him 11 days. Andrew Callahan, 41 years old. A project manager at a regional construction firm whose offices were 3 blocks from Emily's healthcare network building. They had overlapped on a joint infrastructure project. Her organization had been coordinating communications for a new clinic build. His firm had been the contractor. The project had run for roughly 18 months, beginning approximately 3.5 years ago. 8 years ago, Emily and I had been trying for a baby. We'd had 2 years of effort, 1 miscarriage, and a period of quiet desperation that had tested everything between us in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged at the time. When Emily got pregnant with Noah, I had felt something close to religious relief. I had not looked too closely at the timing. I had not wanted to. Looking back now, and this is the one I return to most, the one that sits in the chest differently from the others, I had known, in some pre-verbal and unexamined way, that the timelines were close. Emily had been working late. There had been a period of particular distance between us. And then the pregnancy. And the joy of it had been so clean and total that I had let it erase everything that came before. I had made a decision, years ago, without ever admitting I was making it. I had chosen to believe. Not because the evidence supported it, but because the alternative was a door I didn't want to open. Denial isn't weakness. I understood that now. It's a choice, a deliberate, costly, fully conscious choice disguised as an absence of awareness. You don't sleepwalk into it. You walk in with your eyes open and pull the door shut behind you. I sat with everything Marcus had given me for 4 days. I sat with it through 3 dinners and a Sunday morning and 2 of Noah's soccer practices. I sat with it while Emily talked to me normally and made coffee and asked about my schedule and moved through our shared life with the smooth and unremarkable ease of a woman who had processed her own reckoning a year ago and come out the other side into a resolved, compartmentalized version of the truth. She had decided I didn't need to know. That was what I kept arriving at. Not the affair. I could understand an affair, in the clinical sense that I could understand how people make terrible choices under specific pressures. What I couldn't absorb was the decision she had made after Andrew. The cold, private assessment. The test. The results. The drawer. I had thought of a dozen possible interpretations and sat with each of them honestly. Perhaps she had been protecting Noah from upheaval. Perhaps she had been protecting me. Perhaps she had been so terrified of what the truth would do to our family that she had convinced herself that silence was mercy. What none of these interpretations changed was the fact that she had spent 14 months looking at me across the dinner table, watching me coach Noah's soccer, watching me build a life around a version of reality she knew to be false, and choosing, every single day, to let me keep building it. I called Josh on a Thursday evening and told him I was going to confront her. "What do you need?" he asked. That was Josh. No preamble, no advice I hadn't asked for. Just, what do you need? "I need you to be available," I said. "In case it goes sideways." "I'm here," he said. I waited until Noah was at school. A Friday morning. Emily worked from home on Fridays. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop when I came downstairs. Coffee beside her, still steaming. She looked up when I came in, natural, unguarded, the face of a Friday morning, and something in my expression must have registered before I'd said a word, because she closed the laptop with a quiet click and set her hands flat on the table. I put the DNA results down in front of her. The original, the one from her drawer. I had taken it the previous evening. She looked at it. She did not pretend she didn't know what it was. "How long have you had it?" I asked. My voice was level. I had decided, sometime in the 4 days I'd sat with Marcus's information, that I was not going to do this loudly. Noah would be home by 3. The neighbors had thin walls. And I had discovered something in the preceding weeks that surprised me. The anger, which I had expected to be the primary thing, was not the primary thing. What was primary was a kind of exhausted, clear-eyed need to understand. 14 months, she said. Quietly. No attempt at alternative explanation. "You knew Noah wasn't mine." Yes. For 14 months. Yes. Her voice was very small. Emily. I sat down across from her. I need you to explain to me how you made that decision. Not the affair. The decision after. The test. The results. The drawer. 14 months of knowing and saying nothing. I need to understand the reasoning. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, it came out halting, assembled in real time rather than prepared. I ended it before I took the test. You have to know that. It was over. I thought, if I took the test and Noah was yours, it would all just be something I carried alone. Something I didn't have to put on you. She stopped. When the results came back, she pressed her hands together on the table. I panicked. I told myself I needed time to figure out how to tell you. That I needed to do it right. 14 months, I said. I was afraid. Of what? Of losing you. Of losing this. Her voice broke on the last word, and I watched her cry with the particular feeling of someone who has already done all the crying he's going to do on a matter and has arrived somewhere beyond it. Of Noah losing his father. Of everything falling apart. Everything has fallen apart, I said. It just fell apart quietly, without my knowledge, for over a year. She didn't answer. There wasn't an answer. I had expected the confrontation to feel like relief. It did not feel like relief. It felt like confirmation of something I had already known and had been living with for weeks, and underneath it, something more complicated. A grief that was not precisely about Emily, but about the version of this life I had believed I was living. The Saturday mornings with Noah. The dinners. The back porch in summer. All of it still real, all of it still having happened exactly as I'd experienced it, and simultaneously revised into something other than what I'd believed it was. Andrew Callahan, I said. Her head came up sharply. I know his name. I know what the timeline means. She went very still. I'm not asking about the affair, I said. I've processed the affair. What I'm asking you is whether you were ever going to tell me. Not the right time, not the right framing, whether there was ever a version of this where you sat down and said, Ethan, there is something you need to know. The silence that followed was its own answer. I stood up. I told her I needed time. I told her I would be in touch about Noah's schedule. I took the DNA results from the table, put them in my jacket pocket, and walked out through the front door into a Friday morning that looked exactly like every other Friday morning, and I got into my truck, and I drove. I ended up at the parking lot of a state park about 40 minutes outside of town. I sat there for 2 hours. I did not call anyone. I watched 2 Canada geese argue over a piece of bread near the water's edge and found, to my vague surprise, that there was something almost funny about it. Life at its most ordinary, completely indifferent to what was happening in the truck 20 meters away. That was the day I left. Not permanently. I had Noah to think about, and I had understood since the Friday morning I found the test results that whatever I was going to do, I was going to remain his father. But I packed a bag and I called Josh and I stayed in his guest room for 3 weeks, and during those 3 weeks I thought about very little except Noah and what kind of father I intended to be for the rest of his life. The answer to that question turned out to be uncomplicated. I was going to be his father. Completely, without reservation, in every way that the word means anything. Biology was a fact, fatherhood was a choice, and I had been choosing it every day for 7 years without knowing I was choosing it. That didn't make the choice less real. It made it more real. What I couldn't do, what I discovered I was incapable of, in those 3 weeks in Josh's guest room, was unknow what I knew about Emily. The calculus she had done. The 14 months. I could understand it, in the way that I could understand how fear produces terrible decisions. I could not carry it. I moved into a rental apartment 6 weeks after the confrontation. 2 bedrooms. A small kitchen that got good morning light. Noah had his own room there, painted the particular shade of blue he picked out of a hardware store sample card with the absolute conviction of a 7-year-old who knows what he wants. Emily and I arrived at a co-parenting arrangement that was workable without being warm. She had a lawyer. I had a lawyer. The details were sorted with the quiet efficiency of two people who have nothing left to negotiate except logistics. Noah moved between us on a schedule he adjusted to with the remarkable elasticity of children. Asking questions we answered honestly at the level he was ready for, understanding more than he let on, as children do. I did not contact Andrew. I had thought about it, in the early weeks, not violently, but with a specific and purposeful anger that I needed somewhere to put. Josh talked me out of it, not with arguments but with a question: what do you want to come out of that conversation? I couldn't answer. There was nothing Andrew could give me that I needed. He was a fact of the situation, not a factor in its resolution. Emily came to me, about 4 months after I moved out. She came to the apartment on a Tuesday evening. Noah was at a sleepover, and she stood in the doorway and asked if she could come in. I let her in. She sat on the couch I'd bought secondhand and told me she was in therapy, that she was working to understand the choices she'd made, that she was not asking me to forgive her but that she needed me to know she was sorry in a way that went beyond the word. I believed her. That was the complicated part. I did believe her. Emily had not become a different person than the one I'd known. She had been afraid and she had made the worst possible sequence of choices that fear could produce, and she was genuinely sorry for them. None of that opened a door I had closed. I know, I said. I believe you. But it's not enough, I said. Not because you don't mean it. Because I can't get back to the place where this could be enough. That place doesn't exist anymore. She left about 40 minutes later. I watched her car pull out of the parking lot from the kitchen window. I felt the particular sadness of a thing that is clearly over, not raw grief, but the quiet weight of finality. The kind that settles in after the acute pain has done its work. Noah asked me once, about 2 months into the new arrangement, whether I was sad. We were at the kitchen table eating cereal on a Saturday morning. He'd been looking at me with the focused, assessing attention that kids have when they're trying to read the room. Sometimes, I said. He thought about this for a moment. Then, me too. But mostly I'm okay. Me too, I said. Mostly I'm okay. He went back to his cereal with the satisfied nod of someone who has confirmed an important hypothesis. I looked at him, the dark eyes, the cereal on his chin, the small, serious face of my son, and felt something shift in my chest into something steadier and warmer than it had been in months. I thought about the crayon drawing in my jacket pocket. The family with the oversized heads. Me on the left with the hammer. I had put it up on the refrigerator in the new apartment the first week I moved in, because it was the truest picture I owned of what we were. Biology is a fact. Fatherhood is a practice. I had been practicing it for 7 years before I knew I was choosing it, and I intended to practice it for every year that followed. That was the only thing, in the end, that held. The apartment got good morning light. Noah liked his blue room. I had work that used my hands and produced something visible. Josh came for dinner on occasional Thursdays. The geese on the lake near my state park parking spot were still there the last time I drove past, still arguing about whatever geese argue about, still entirely indifferent to the particulars of human grief. I was, most days, okay. On some days I was better than that. What Ethan's story reveals, at its structural core, is not a marriage destroyed by an affair. It's a marriage destroyed by the management of an affair. The infidelity itself, as painful as it was, represented a human failure of the kind that relationships have sometimes survived. What made survival impossible here was not the original breach but the architecture Emily built around it, the test ordered in private, the results concealed, the 14 months of daily performance. There is a specific psychology at work in that kind of sustained concealment. Emily did not deceive Ethan out of malice. The evidence suggests she had ended the affair, felt genuine remorse, and was genuinely afraid of the consequences of disclosure. But fear, when it drives decision-making for long enough, stops feeling like fear. It becomes a framework. You build your daily life inside it, and start calling it protection. Protection of the child, protection of the marriage, protection of the man you don't want to hurt. The self-deception is not cynical. It is almost sincere. And that is precisely what makes it so corrosive. What Emily could not calculate, or would not let herself calculate, was the compound cost of delay. Every day she did not tell him was a day Ethan spent investing in a version of reality that was not real. Every dinner, every weekend, every Saturday morning on the soccer field. He was building something with materials he had not been told were compromised. When the structure finally came down, it took not just the marriage but the entire landscape of his recent past with it, not destroying the memories themselves, but stripping them of the context in which they had occurred. This is the specific damage that disclosure delay produces. It is not the same as the damage of the original act. The affair was a rupture. The silence was a sustained rewrite. Ethan's response to this, particularly his decision about Noah, is the moral center of the story. He understood, clearly and without drama, that the DNA result was a biological fact that had no bearing on a 7-year relationship built entirely from choice and presence and accumulated days. What he refused to do was allow Andrew Callahan's existence to redefine what he and Noah were to each other. That refusal was not performed virtue. It was pragmatic love, the recognition that fatherhood, at its functional core, is not a genetic condition but a sustained practice of showing up. The confrontation scene is notable for what it was not. There was no explosion, no theatrical accusation. Ethan had done all the emotional work of that conversation in advance, alone, in the weeks between finding the envelope and opening it with Emily present. By the time he sat across from her, the anger had been processed into something more useful, the need for an honest accounting. He was not trying to wound her. He was trying to understand how a person who loved him had been able to make the choice she made, repeatedly, for over a year. Her answer, fear, was true, and it was not enough. Those two things can coexist. Truth and insufficiency are not mutually exclusive. Ethan understood this, and it was what allowed him to close the door without bitterness. Not because he had forgiven her in the full sense of the word, but because he had arrived at a place where her reasons were comprehensible, and the outcome was still fixed. The door was not closed in anger. It was closed in clarity. What the story ultimately illuminates is the hidden cost of the information we choose to manage rather than share. Emily controlled the truth. She curated Ethan's reality with the intention of protecting something she valued. In doing so, she removed his ability to participate in any of the decisions that were actually his to make, decisions about his marriage, his fatherhood, his life. The protection was real. The violation that accompanied it was equally real. You cannot strip someone of their agency and call it love. What stays with me about this story is something smaller than the affair and larger than the DNA test. It's that forward text message, "This has to stop." Emily sent it. She ended things. She tried to make it right in the only way she could see at the time, quietly, privately, without anyone knowing the shape of what she was putting behind her. And then she ordered the test. And the test told her something she didn't have a plan for. I think about what it would have cost her to call Ethan that day. The day she opened the results and read the number. How much it would have hurt, how much it would have broken, how much she stood to lose. And then I think about what it cost him not to know. The real question isn't why people betray each other. It's why we so often choose the version of the truth that protects us over the version that's owed to someone else. We tell ourselves it's mercy. Sometimes it might even be. But mostly, if we're being honest, it's fear wearing the mask of kindness. Ethan survived it. Noah is okay. That has to count for something.